welcome to the third episode of NoCap of GCAP. My name is Jasmine. In today's episode, we will be talking to Dr. Schwabe, who is an environmental economics and policy professor here at UC Riverside. So we will be discussing many topics today surrounding water saving tips and tricks, and we will also talk about your research. Continue watching to learn more about these topics. So now we're going to get to the questions. The first question is just a little overview of how you started teaching here at UCR.
Right, yeah. So I came out here in 1999. I moved from University in Ohio, where I was in the economics department. And out here they had a position for an environmental natural resource economist in their Department of Environmental Sciences. And so for my first 15 years, all the environmental and natural resource economists were housed in the Department of Environmental Sciences. It's in the College of Natural and Agricultural Sciences, which is similar to a lot of universities around the country that have land grant institutions. They have a group of ag or natural resource economists, and that's where they're typically housed. And then in 2015, we opened up the School of Public Policy, and I was looking to kind of increase the policy relevance and opportunities to engage with policymakers, water managers, elected officials, and such. So I moved my position over to the School of Public Policy at that time.
Oh, cool. Have you enjoyed your time here so far?
Oh, I love it. It's it's just having growing up in the Midwest and particularly Minnesota, I have to say that I do like the weather out here better. Yeah,
really?
And my area of research is on water scarcity,
Mm-hmm.
and so I do a lot of research here and in Australia and sometimes elsewhere, Vietnam, Spain, Mexico, South Africa, but this area here, they have a lot of progressive water managers and policies that they want to consider, and so it's a great environment, great lab. They really value research, and so I see a lot of partnerships with institutions around California, governmental, non-NGO institutions, to look at how we might be able to solve water scarcity issues.
Yeah, that's good. Would you say overall as a society that we're taking the correct steps for water conservation?
We're getting there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, for instance, California, you might consider as an example. California, in general, if you look at residential water use, let's say, on the indoor side of things, we've been doing a really good job at conserving water through faucets and toilets and showers and clothes washers and such. Probably the place where we can make the most gains now, and actually the area with the lowest cost to make those gains, would be outdoors. So thinking about the types of irrigation systems we have, but more so the types of landscapes we choose to have, and the potential water savings if we switch out of kind of these Bermuda grass East Coast landscapes into more climate, California-friendly Mediterranean climate landscapes.
Do you have any specific suggestions on tips that we should consider when thinking about conserving our water usage?
Yeah, it's a great question, and two, I guess, in particular. So, and one has to do with outdoor and one has to do with indoor.
Yeah.
And one is a little bit counterintuitive. So as an economist, we always think about trade-offs with different choices we make. And as a water economist, or economist that focuses on water, I also think about water balance when I'm doing my research. And so it's an interesting place to be in Southern California, where all of our wastewater goes down to Orange County and gets reused. And so if we decide to engage in conservation in the Inland Empire, it's an interesting trade-off, since that means less water will go down to Orange County, where they have the largest water recycling plant in the whole world. And so they take our wastewater and they pump it in the ground. They treat it and they put it into drinking water, And so it's really interesting. So when my kids leave the faucet on indoors, I'm kind of wrestling with this idea that, listen, and they turn it off, right? You're taught to turn off the faucet. And I think, you turn it off, but then I think, well, what are they going to do down in Orange County? Are they going to go buy some more water from the Sierras in Northern California and ship it all the way down? Or is it better to get more use out of that single drop here?
Yeah.
And so it's actually a really complex problem. And it gets at this idea of return flows. If you keep your eye on like maintaining water balance, you can understand the trade-offs with the decisions you make, and then you can decide what the best choice is. But so the indoor poses that issue. It's that, our wastewater gets reused, and more the state is investing in wastewater recycling, making huge investments, and there's a lot to be gained there in terms of water supply augmentation. On the outdoor side, though, I think the biggest potential gain is thinking about the landscapes we have. And so, again, kind of as I said before, we have this really high water using Bermuda grass that we often use, and a lot of us who came out from the Midwest, we bring that kind of, this is what our front lawn has to look like, right? And we don't use it, right? So a lot of this landscape that we have, we just look at it, and it uses a lot of water. And so if you can think about any of the landscapings that you don't necessarily use, to move it out of that high water using turf grass and put it into something, not rocks, it doesn't have to be xeriscaping. You still want some type of plants for the species and the butterflies and things like that. So you want to think about, talk to your local water agency, often has subsidy programs for those types of things. So that's where I'd suggest we probably get our most return.
I recently discovered that using less hot water is beneficial for water conservation because we wait longer for hot water to heat up. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, and one of the largest energy, besides air conditioning and heating the house, but heating hot water is a big energy consumer as well. So that has obviously impacts on your electricity bill and climate. And some of our portfolio still comes from fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of waiting and for your water to cool off, so there's different technologies out there where you can actually keep your water from actually running, and it can heat up your water in the pipes.
Really?
Yeah. So you don't have to turn it on and wait for your water heater to heat up the water, and then it comes through. You have a little switch, and you can turn the switch on, or I guess you turn the switch off, and it keeps the water from coming out, or it's just a dribble. And the water heats up in the pipes, and that way you can then flip the knob back on, and the hot water can come out. So that takes a little bit of engineering, and it's not so costly. And they have different types of also water heating systems as well that are more expensive. That it keeps the water hot in your pipes at all times if you need to. Yeah, that's way too expensive. But yeah, it's an interesting choice. Right, and everyone has kind of their different point in which they are comfortable with that trade-off. But in the overall scheme of water use and addressing water scarcity in California, say, your decision about whether you wait a half a minute or not letting your water heat up probably isn't going to make much of a difference in terms of the overall impacts on water scarcity and the services it provides in terms of the environment and other elements. Yeah. I mean, and just to put that in perspective, that 80% of the water that's consumed in California, so we're keeping out like water that just is used for the environment, for your flowing rivers in the far north and things like that. But of what humans typically consume, 80% goes to agriculture, and 20% goes to municipalities and for human consumption and such. And so the real water savings is going to be coming from choices outdoors, mostly on water savings. We're thinking about this kind of from a statewide perspective or even a regional or local perspective. What you do on the inside of your house and changing your water use isn't going to make overall a significant impact. But, I understand also the adage that kind of, it's the aggregation of small activities that can be something that's large. But if you want to wait a half a minute more, you should feel okay if it gives you a warm shower, and then change out your landscape. Right? So yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So the main things that we could do personally is to change the landscape of our homes.
Yeah, that's the largest kind of, I want to say, area of water use where we haven't really engaged in much efficiency improvements or conservation. And so on the indoor use, right now the average amount of gallons someone uses in California is around maybe 52, 53 gallons per capita per day. Now the state of California has enacted regulations now where by 2030 they want that number to come down to 42 gallons per capita per day, so per person per day. So that's a pretty big decrease. But the outdoor water use is about the same amount. It's around 50 gallons. I know it's outdoors, but we still measure it in this kind of units of gallons per capita per day. And so there hasn't been a lot of change in our water use outdoors, whereas indoors we've seen a significant decrease in water use over the last 20 to 30 years. And actually in California, total water use has actually decreased in California just slightly since 1990. So even on the agricultural side of things, which is surprising to a lot of people, and the municipal side of things, we are actually using less water in California today than we were in 1990. And the reason for that is a lot of these, people just being more aware of how they utilize water. And most of those savings has come from in agriculture by switching to different types of irrigation systems. And in municipal environments and residential places, it's indoor water conservation that people are engaged in. And so we've seen a really good improvement or large improvement in how people have engaged in conservation.
That's good. Can you talk a little bit about your role in the PPIC's Water Policy Center?
Sure, yeah, that's been something when they started up about 10 years ago, I became an adjunct research fellow with it, and then more recently I've become a more formal senior consultant with them. And so they're this nonprofit that focuses entirely on water issues in California. And they've built up a really good reputation of being nonpartisan and evidence-based in terms of how they inform policy. And so, and they really spent a lot of time, which I think academics could do typically a better job at taking high-quality research and putting it in a really digestible manner for the public. And in that sense, I think it goes a lot further in reaching people to say, okay, this is what the real issue is, and I understand it now. I understand the consequences, or understand the potential solutions. And so, yeah, it's been a real rewarding experience engaging with them more because in about 2015, I switched my position to the School of Public Policy, as I said, to focus more on policy relevant issues. And the Public Policy Institute, that is what they're focused on, is really policy relevant actions that inform the regulators and managers and stakeholders and the citizens, people. Yeah.
So, how do you usually go about challenges that you've experienced within your role?
Yeah, so water certainly brings together a lot of conflict, right? So you have kind of the three main sectors, water for the environment, water for municipalities, residential use, commercial, industrial, institutional use, and then you got water for agriculture. And so my initial research was looking at water and environment and agricultural interactions, and then since 2015 I've been focusing more on municipal issues and kind of just overall issues now. So I think that when I'm thinking about my research, I certainly want to make it nonpartisan. I want to make it really evidence-based. And as an economist in the academic environment as well, I try to stay away from telling people what they should do. And in this sense, what I do is I say, well, if you do this, here are the consequences. And if you do this, here are the consequences. And let people and elected officials and policymakers decide what to do. My role is to inform in that sense. And so, I certainly make sure that the research is sound. I think the people at UC Riverside, I think they have a really good reputation at doing high quality, sound research. And so then just bringing that to the public's attention. Yeah.
Well, jumping into your research, can we hear about your experiences in Australia and Spain?
Sure, yeah. I've spent a number of my sabbaticals in different areas around the world looking at water security and environmental sustainability issues. And 3 of my sabbaticals, part of them I've spent in Australia looking at water scarcity and water reliability issues there. And the interesting thing about Australia is that at least their main part in where most of the population is, it has a very similar climate to California, Southern California. It's an arid, semi-arid region. They have these severe more intense droughts that they're experiencing. Water supply reliability is becoming more of an issue. And so they're trying to think about, well, how do we meet demands for agriculture, municipalities, and the environment with less reliable water? And so my research over there is sometimes I'll go over there and give them ideas of what we're doing over here that seems to be working in terms of how we price water, how we, issues associated with water rights, how we manage water at the groundwater level. And then sometimes when I go over there, I see what they're doing. And so Australia is really good in water markets. And so they're kind of a world leader in terms of how you deal with water scarcity and what the benefits of water markets are, how you set them up. And so that's kind of where we've taken information from them. And then our modeling techniques we've taken over there. And one of the things that California and the Southwest has a kind of a comparative advantage on is this idea of how you utilize groundwater systems to help improve resilience. So can I go a little more detail on this? Okay. All right. So under climate changes, what's happening is that at least most of the models will suggest that while, say, the climate's warming, the overall level of precipitation isn't necessarily changing, but it's becoming more variable. And in California, we have an infrastructure that's set up for a 19th century precipitation regime. And now what's happening is you're getting these really big rainfall events where it's falling more as rain than snow, and it's coming more in fewer periods. And so there's huge flooding events. And our infrastructure just isn't capable for capturing it. And so a lot of it will flow. We have to release a lot more water from our storage, our dams, our reservoirs and such, because otherwise they fill up and they could overflow. And so you're thinking about, well, so to improve water reliability and water resilience, we need to store more of that water. And so one of the areas that we're thinking about is let's store it in groundwater. And the nice thing about this is, well, the bad thing about this is that we've overpumped most of our groundwater systems in California. And globally, this is something that you see. And in economics, we talk about these things as common property resources. It's like fisheries too. When everyone has access to it and they don't think about the cost they impose on other users, right? Yeah. This is why you see overfishing and why you also see groundwater systems that are almost always overpumped. And so when you overpump groundwater systems, it leads to a lot of damages. Obviously, it costs more to pump water out. Small, rural, often lower income communities lose access to that groundwater. And often it's the only water supply that they have, leads to land subsidence. And then also detaches itself from groundwater dependent ecosystems and streams. So a lot of streams are dependent on those groundwater systems filling up and overflowing. And when you pump too much, you lose that connection. And therefore then you lose the ecosystems and the habitat. And so what we're finding is that you can actually take those flood flows and rather than build a huge reservoir, surface reservoir where you have tons of evaporation, you lose a lot of water, let's just use all the capacity we have in these groundwater systems.
Is it possible that groundwater pumping in California land would get ruined? Is there any possible way that would happen?
And that is exactly what's happening. And that's just globally. I think probably 95% of the groundwater systems or aquifers throughout the world are overdrafted. And so it just means that people that have had lands or straws or pumps in the groundwater system, they pump based on their own costs, but they don't think about, again, the costs that's being imposed on others. And what this leads to is just overpumping. And you're right, it's led to a lot of damages and devastation because of that. And it's not sustainable. It's a real big issue. It's probably one of the most significant water issues in the world right now. And so what we're suggesting is that because of the changing climate, what we can do is we need to think about how to take those flood flows that are now much more abundant and funnel them into floodplains. So you keep the floodplains, every now and then you have these pulse flows that help create and maintain the ecosystems that are there, but also let the water percolate down and start to build up the groundwater systems again, and that way not destroy the capacity that's there.
That seems really complicated, the whole process.
So it's a good comment that you made there in the sense that it is, the water systems are complicated.
Yeah.
And so, what I've learned over my 30 years of doing research in this area is that myself as an economist, I can provide some information, but very limited unless I work with other scientists. Together, I think we have a much better chance at developing a more economical, sustainable, and equitable solution than if we try to work on these things separately.
Yeah, that's good. Can we hear a little bit about the International Water Forum that you went to in Vietnam?
Sure, yeah. This has been something I've just been invited to be on the board for the Rosenberg International Water Forum. And so the forum is a group of water experts from around the world, mostly economists, but hydrologists as well, and engineers in there. And every 2 years, we'll find a region where they're confronting a really significant water scarcity issue or water quality issue. And then we'll go there, we'll get some material beforehand. We'll engage with the local experts and local community members, and we have these fellowships that we give out to students and postdocs or young experts, scholars. And we'll spend 3 or 4 days looking at that issue and deciding what can we pull from our knowledge from other areas around the world, while being informed with what's going on in that particular environment. And so this year's forum was in Vietnam, and it's looking at the Mekong Delta.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges with the Delta is that obviously with sea level rise, it's coming in, it's very flat on the Delta, and as the seawater comes in, it destroys habitat and destroys a lot of the rice farming that's going on in the Delta and other types of farming. But what we found out was a more pressing concern, where the change in the elevation of the Delta was more impacted was by the lack of sedimentation coming from the upper parts of the Mekong. And so the Mekong River goes through 4 or 5 different countries. And as these countries start to build dams, often for hydropower, you get less sedimentation coming down and replenishing the sediment that the ocean takes out when it comes into the Delta. And so over time, without the dams, you find this kind of equilibrium, right? The ocean comes in, it takes out the sediment, the river comes down and deposits the sediment, and it's this kind of dance over time, and usually some type of equilibrium might occur. But as you start to develop more dams, less sedimentation goes down, but you still have the ocean pulling away the sedimentation, and therefore you're seeing land subsidence and a decrease in the elevation here, which is then causing the ocean to come in much more quickly than people had anticipated. And that's destroying a lot of livelihoods and a lot of pristine ecosystems there. So it's a real challenge. So it also brings in international conflict. So how does one country tell another country, stop doing that, right? So part of the forum was just understanding the dynamics of why is this issue arising? Why are we losing rice harvests more frequently than we used to lose, and ecosystems and habitat more so than we used to in the past. And then so it's just not sea level rise, it's these other actions that are going on. And then you think about, well, what kind of human behavior is exacerbating that?
Can we hear about your journey along the Mississippi River with your friend John?
Yeah. So I think this is probably years and decades ago when I was about your age.
Oh, wow.
And so I grew up in Minnesota, and Minnesota is the place where the Mississippi starts. And so it's all part of our lives up there. And at one point when I was between jobs and thinking about going back to graduate school, I was bartending and painting houses. So I had a lot of flexibility. And my friend John came over, and for some reason I wasn't working that day. And he said, meet me out front in the lawn, and out of my apartment. And he had this big gunny sack. And he pulls out a couple big hats, straw hats, and he pulls out a big jug of whiskey. And then Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. And he says, let's canoe the Mississippi. I've got this old canoe. It's an aluminum, 17-foot aluminum canoe that was built out of former bomber aluminum that Northrop Grumman used to build bombers during the Second World War. And so the canoe was a wedding present to his parents, who have both passed away. But it's this canoe that was built in the 50s. And so an old aluminum canoe. Anyways, he said, yeah, I got the canoe, let's paddle it. And we thought we were going to do the river in 2 weeks. And we got to the middle of Iowa from Minneapolis, and then we realized we actually have to go back to the headwaters and then go down to Minneapolis so we complete everything and then restart from Iowa and go down to the Gulf of Mexico. And it took us 32 years to do that.
Wow.
Yeah. So every couple of years we'd get together. We each had our own families, and he moved to Europe for a while. But every couple of years we'd get together and we'd pick up our canoe. We'd usually, some local would take it for a couple of years, and we would then get in the canoe, paddle, and camp on the side of the river, and just meet a lot of locals along the way. It was a blast. We had places where we jumped on a train at one point to get back to the Twin Cities.
Way.
Yeah, we were hobos, I guess, in that sense. Yeah, we got arrested at one point.
Wow.
We got guns pulled on us.
Oh my God.
We went through rapids and almost gotten hit by barges. But we've seen just amazing places, and we never brought any electronics with us.
Yeah.
And so you'd wake up, you wouldn't know what time it was, and later on we had families. We brought our phones, but really limited to just calling. But we wanted to just be off the grid, and it was a really, really wonderful experience.
Yeah. What was your initial reaction to when your friend asked you to go?
Yeah, well, I thought that sounds pretty good, and kind of this. I'm more risk averse than he is, right? I don't necessarily want to say conservative. I'm more risk averse, and he just likes to explore. And so it was a really good partnership in the sense that when we got on the river, I was kind of like, just my nature is like, okay, I want to get this done. Right? Check it off, right? That's that type of personality I have. And he's someone who says, a little shiny object, hey, look, there's supposed to be a town over there. Let's go check it out. Let's go have a cup of coffee in the morning and talk with the locals. And I'm thinking, yeah, but we need to get this thing done at some point before we die. And so it was really good in the sense that he allowed me to see a lot more things than I ever would have, right?
Yeah.
I kept us alive because he wanted to take all these risks and say, yeah, maybe not. Maybe we shouldn't go in front of that barge or go next to this area here. So it was a really good compliment. But it's his idea. And he always pushed us to make sure it was a journey rather than a destination. And so learned a lot from him in that sense.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Like you guys balanced each other out.
I think so.
That way.
Yeah.
So I'll wrap up now. So thank you all for watching this episode of No Cap with GCAP. And thank you, Dr. Schwabe, for your time and meaningful discussion today. We will see you guys next time. Make sure to stay sustainable and subscribe to our channel to engage with our content. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.